Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell, because what I'm about to share can truly change the way you experience your own mind, your habits, and your daily sense of well-being. Now let me start with something many of you over the age of 55 need to hear, because it's not being talked about. If you're over 55, there's a shocking reason life feels less joyful, less motivating, and more exhausting. Your dopamine system isn't simply aging, it's being hijacked. And the fix isn't what your doctor told you. Most people assume that feeling flat, tired, unfocused, or overwhelmed is just part of getting older. But that's not the whole truth. In fact, many seniors across the Western world are experiencing dopamine disruption not because of age, but because of modern overstimulation. The world changed faster than our brains could adapt. Notifications, processed foods, streaming platforms, constant news, online shopping, prescription overload. This environment is overwhelming our reward pathways. And when your dopamine system becomes unbalanced, everyday life stops feeling rewarding. Motivation drops. Pleasure dulls. Energy dips. You begin to feel like a spectator in your own life, instead of an active participant. But the most important thing I want you to know is this. Your brain is still capable of joy, drive, clarity, and deep satisfaction, no matter your age. You are not broken. Your dopamine pathways are simply overwhelmed, and they can be recalibrated. And that's exactly what we're going to explore today. Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to challenge a belief that has quietly infiltrated modern life across the United States, Europe, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia, the belief that we can push harder, consume more, stimulate endlessly, and somehow escape the biological bill. We are living in a dopamine-drenched world. Notifications, streaming, ultra-processed foods, alcohol, caffeine overdoses, endless scrolling. Our brains are being tugged, poked, seduced every minute of the day. And just like any system under constant pressure, our dopamine circuitry begins to protest, not with a whisper, with a scream. You feel it as burnout, as I'm tired but wired, as the inability to sit still, or the inability to get started at all. You feel it as anxiety masquerading as productivity, as the creeping sense of flatness in activities that once excited you. This isn't weakness, this is neurobiology. Now you've heard of dopamine detoxes, digital fasting, meditation, cold plunges, you name it. But there's another piece that almost no one is talking about, and it's shockingly simple. Magnesium, not the supplement aisle magic bullet, not the influencer cocktail of powders and pills. I'm talking about magnesium as a biological foundation, the mineral that your nerve cells need to fire properly, to calm appropriately, to maintain balance between pleasure and pain. Because when your dopamine system becomes overstimulated, your brain activates its brake pedal. Stress mediators, downregulation, fatigue. Magnesium plays a quiet, unglamorous, but essential role in recalibrating those neural circuits. Without enough of it, your brain doesn't recover from overstimulation as efficiently. You feel more frazzled, more reactive, less resilient. But here's the real problem. In our premium high-performance cultures, in our tech-driven, convenience-obsessed lifestyles, we've created a perfect storm that depletes magnesium while simultaneously flooding our dopamine pathways. Chronic stress consumes magnesium. Poor sleep destabilizes it. High caffeine intake increases loss. Ultra-processed diets lack it. Alcohol drains it. And suddenly, we're left with a brain that's overstimulated and under-resourced. Now let me be absolutely clear. Magnesium is not a cure-all. It is not going to magically reset every aspect of your dopamine system. But restoring what your biology naturally depends on, nutritionally, behaviorally, emotionally, is essential if you want a nervous system that feels stable rather than frazzled, focused rather than frantic, alive rather than numb. You deserve a life that isn't ruled by compulsions. You deserve a brain that doesn't swing wildly between craving and collapse. You deserve a relationship with pleasure that enhances your life rather than controls it. And that begins with honoring the fundamentals. giving your brain the structure it needs to function in a world designed to overwhelm it. So I want to challenge you today. Choose one place to create space, one place to reduce stimulation, one place to nourish your brain, one place to reclaim balance, not because you're fragile, but because you're powerful. Because the most liberated version of you is not the one chasing the next hit of pleasure. It's the one who can experience joy, motivation, and desire on your own terms. Your dopamine system isn't broken beyond repair. It's calling for recalibration. And you have the ability, right now, in this moment, to answer that call. High performers pride themselves on their stamina, their discipline, their relentless ability to push through obstacles. But what most people never realize is that this very drive, the force that propels them to the top, is also the force that places them at the greatest risk for dopamine dysregulation. Dopamine is not just the molecule of pleasure, it is the molecule of motivation. It's what gets you up in the morning, fuels your effort, sharpens your ambition. But dopamine is also a double-edged sword. The more you chase it, the more it demands. The more you stimulate it, the less sensitive your brain becomes. And nowhere is this vicious cycle more common than in the lives of high performers, because achievers don't burn out from laziness, they burn out from addiction. Not addiction to substances, addiction to intensity, addiction to the constant pursuit of more output, more speed, more recognition, more stimulation. The world rewards this behavior. High achievers get the promotions, the applause, the attention. But beneath the praise is a nervous system pushed past its natural limits, a brain trapped in an unending loop of reward and depletion. When every win becomes fuel for the next chase, the ability to rest, reset, and simply be human begins to erode. The irony is that high performers are the people least likely to recognize the early warning signs. They interpret exhaustion as weakness, stress as motivation, anxiety as fuel. They override their biology until their biology overrides them. Sleep becomes fragmented, focus becomes scattered, pleasure becomes blunted. The world loses its color. The things that once brought joy now barely move the needle. This is not a failure of character. This is neuroadaptation, the brain's way of protecting itself from overstimulation. Every dopamine spike triggers a compensatory dip, pleasure followed by pain, reward followed by withdrawal. For most people, those waves are small. For high performers, the waves become tidal. They live on the peaks, long hours, high stakes, intense pressure. And then they crash into the troughs, irritability, numbness, procrastination, low mood, or compulsive behaviors meant to fill the void. They don't see this as dysregulation. They call it hustle. They call it grit. But it's not grit, it's imbalance. The solution isn't to abandon achievement or ambition. The solution is to recognize that your brain is not a machine. It is a living, dynamic system that requires balance to function at its best. High performers thrive not when they push non-stop, but when they cycle effort with recovery. When they allow boredom, rest, and silence to recalibrate their reward pathways. When they practice intentional restraint, taking breaks from stimulation rather than increasing it. When they understand that craving more is not a sign to press harder, but a sign to pause. The truth is, the most successful, fulfilled high performers are the ones who learn to work with their dopamine system instead of abusing it. They harness motivation without letting it consume them. They understand that resilience is not built through excess, but through equilibrium. And they recognize that the ability to stop, step back, and reset is not a weakness. It's the ultimate competitive advantage. We are living in the most comfortable era in human history, yet we are experiencing unprecedented levels of anxiety, depression, burnout, and emptiness. This paradox isn't a mystery. It's neurobiology. We have surrounded ourselves with so much pleasure, convenience, and ease that we've disrupted the natural balance of the brain's reward system. Pleasure is not free. It has a hidden cost, one our ancestors rarely had to pay because their lives required effort, restraint, and daily discomfort. But today, in our world of instant gratification, the bill comes due in the form of dissatisfaction, numbness, and escalating cravings. Every pleasurable experience, whether it's food, technology, shopping, alcohol, entertainment, or even achievement, initiates a predictable sequence in the brain, a rise in dopamine, followed by an equal and opposite dip. This dip is not a flaw, it's a regulatory mechanism. It keeps us from overstimulation and motivates us to pursue survival behaviors. But when we flood the system with repeated pleasure, when we chase continual highs, when we turn to comfort instead of challenge, that dip deepens. The brain begins to recalibrate by reducing dopamine receptors and decreasing dopamine release. The result? We need more just to feel normal and much more to feel good. This is why so many people today feel tired, unmotivated, restless, and joyless. Why scrolling feels easier than focusing. Why silence feels threatening. Why boredom feels unbearable. We have overstimulated the pleasure centers and undertrained the pain and effort systems that build resilience. Our world of abundance has created a scarcity of meaning. When I talk about pain, I don't mean harm, I mean the productive friction that teaches the brain how to regulate itself. Cold plunges, exercise, fasting, disciplined routines, hard conversations, meaningful challenges, these experiences activate the body's stress pathways in a controlled way. They strengthen our capacity for joy by strengthening our tolerance for discomfort. They restore the balance between pleasure and pain. Without that balance, pleasure becomes diluted and eventually disappears. Look at the modern lifestyle across high-income countries. We've engineered away waiting, effort, uncertainty, and delayed gratification. We can access almost any reward instantly. And because dopamine thrives on anticipation, not consumption, we've removed the very conditions that create long-term satisfaction. The more comfortable we become, the more fragile we become. The more convenience we accumulate, the less resilient our minds grow. The psychology they never told you is this: long-term fulfillment requires embracing short-term discomfort. The brain cannot function properly on a constant diet of ease. It needs friction. It needs contrast. It needs moments of silence, inconvenience, and controlled stress to reset its reward circuitry. When we introduce intentional discomfort, we restore the ability to feel pleasure on a normal scale again. Activities become enjoyable. Motivation returns. Life regains depth and texture. We don't need to abandon pleasure. We need to respect its biology. Because when we understand the cost of pleasure, we can choose it wisely. We can stop numbing ourselves with excess and begin cultivating the kind of joy that lasts. Not the spike, but the steady flame that comes from a balanced and resilient brain. When most people think of addiction, they imagine substances, alcohol, drugs, nicotine. But addiction has evolved far beyond chemicals. In our modern world, the most dangerous addictions are often the ones we don't recognize, the ones that hide behind productivity, wellness, and social approval. These are the addictions that quietly infiltrate the lives of high-functioning, responsible, successful individuals. The people who assume addiction is something that happens to someone else. The truth is, addiction is not about the object of desire. It's about the relationship we develop with it. And in a society designed to overstimulate us, almost anything can become a compulsive escape. Consider productivity. On the surface, it looks admirable. Who doesn't want to be efficient, accomplished, and driven? But for many high performers, productivity becomes a way to outrun uncomfortable emotions. Instead of resting or reflecting, they push harder. Instead of slowing down, they fill every minute. Work becomes a socially sanctioned drug, one that delivers dopamine hits through emails, wins, deadlines, and praise. And because society applauds this behavior, it's easy to miss the compulsive edge, the inability to stop. Or look at clean eating. What begins as an attempt to feel healthier can morph into an obsession with purity, rules, and restriction. The constant monitoring of food becomes a form of control, offering a dopamine drip through perfectionism. It's not the salad that's the problem, it's the fixation, the way it narrows your world, the way identity becomes fused with discipline. Even something as benign as online learning can turn addictive. For high achievers, consuming information becomes a way to feel productive without taking real risks. Watching course after course, video after video, offers the illusion of growth while avoiding the discomfort of application. The learning becomes the reward, not the transformation. Dating apps might be the clearest example of hidden modern addiction. They offer endless novelty, infinite choice, the promise of connection without vulnerability. Each swipe is a tiny dopamine spike. Each match is a hit of validation. But the person on the other side becomes secondary to the chase itself. It's not love people get hooked on. It's the anticipation, the rush of possibility, the escape from loneliness or insecurity. News and politics, too, can become addictive. Outrage is a powerful stimulant. Fear is even stronger. The constant drip of updates keeps the brain in a heightened state, craving more information, more certainty, more emotional intensity. And because staying informed is seen as responsible, many people don't recognize the compulsive cycles they're trapped in. What ties all these behaviors together is the pattern: craving, relief, repetition, regret. A loop that narrows life over time. The brain doesn't care whether it's alcohol, work, food rules, or TikTok. It only cares about dopamine. Bar. He path out isn't abstaining from everything. It's waking up. It's noticing the moments when a behavior shifts from choice to compulsion. It's recognizing when something meant to serve your life begins to consume it. And it's having the courage to pause. To pull back. To create space for discomfort instead of drowning it in stimulation. Bar. EC. Oz, hidden addictions don't just steal time, they steal presence, meaning, and the ability to live a life that truly feels like your own. We are trying to build meaningful lives in an environment that is fundamentally hostile to focus, depth, and fulfillment. Our brains were not designed for the pace, noise, and intensity of modern life. We are overstimulated from the moment we wake up until the moment we collapse into bed, scrolling, watching, consuming, bouncing from one dopamine trigger to the next. In this state, it becomes nearly impossible to access the deeper layers of satisfaction, creativity, or presence. We're constantly reacting, rarely engaging, constantly consuming, rarely integrating, constantly stimulated, rarely alive. Every beep, buzz, swipe, ad, notification, and algorithmic nudge competes for control of our nervous system. And it works. It fragments our attention into microscopic pieces. It trains the brain to expect novelty every few seconds. It erodes our ability to tolerate boredom, silence, or slow thinking. Over time, the brain adapts to this constant stimulation by downregulating dopamine receptors, making normal life feel dull, flat, and uninteresting. It's not that life became less meaningful, it's that our reward system became desensitized. Most people don't realize what's happening. They just sense a vague disconnection. They're physically present but mentally elsewhere. They multitask through everything: conversations, meals, even moments of rest. They live in a digital fog, craving stimulation, but unable to derive real pleasure from it. This is the consequence of an overstimulated brain. We become strangers to our own lives. But here's the good news. The same brain that adapts to overstimulation can also adapt to stillness. Neuroplasticity cuts both ways. When we intentionally create space, space without noise, space without constant input, space for boredom and reflection, the brain recalibrates. Dopamine sensitivity increases, attention stabilizes, creativity resurfaces, the world becomes textured and interesting again. The first step is reclaiming your attention, not with willpower, but with boundaries. If we don't create friction between ourselves and the technology engineered to capture us, we will always lose. Our brains are ancient, the algorithms are not. Turning off notifications, limiting screen time, creating tech-free zones, these aren't signs of weakness. They are acts of rebellion against a system designed to override our biology. Silence is another form of medicine. The absence of stimulation allows the brain's reward pathways to reset. It allows thoughts to settle, insights to surface, emotions to be felt rather than outrun. People are afraid of silence because it forces them to meet parts of themselves they've numbed with distraction. But silence is where clarity lives. It's where identity is rebuilt. It's where desire becomes authentic rather than algorithmically implanted. Then comes intentional effort, activities that require presence, patience, or discomfort. Reading long books, training without headphones, sitting with your thoughts, completing tasks without switching to something easier. These are the exercises that restore cognitive endurance and deepen pleasure. They strengthen the pathways that make life meaningful. We can't eliminate overstimulation from the world, but we can choose whether we are owned by it. Rewiring your brain isn't about withdrawing from life. It's about participating in it fully without the distortion of constant digital noise. When you reclaim your attention, you reclaim your autonomy. When you create space, you rediscover yourself. And when you learn to live in an overstimulated world without surrendering to it, you unlock a kind of fulfillment that technology can't imitate, and dopamine spikes can't sustain. Desire is one of the most powerful forces in the human brain. It drives us toward connection, achievement, exploration, novelty, and pleasure. Without desire, we would have no motivation, no spark, no forward momentum. But in the modern world, desire has been twisted into something unrecognizable. We're no longer experiencing desire in its natural rhythm. We're experiencing desire engineered by corporations, algorithms, marketing, and infinite access. We're taught to want more than we need, faster than we can process, and constantly enough that we never truly feel satisfied. The result is a generation overwhelmed by craving yet starved for fulfillment. In the past, desire evolved in an environment of scarcity. We needed it to survive. But now, we live in abundance, and the brain's ancient machinery becomes overwhelmed. Unlimited food, unlimited entertainment, unlimited information, unlimited stimulation. Every desire can be gratified instantly. The problem is that the brain interprets instant as excess. When we gratify desire too quickly or too often, dopamine surges, and every surge is followed by a compensatory drop, a dip that makes the next desire feel even stronger. Over time, the wanting becomes louder than the enjoyment. The chase eclipses the reward. This is how people end up living lives dominated by urges, checking their phones without thinking, reaching for snacks without hunger, buying things they don't need, binge-watching without interest, swiping on apps without intention. They feel pulled by forces they don't quite understand. They confuse craving with passion, distraction with pleasure, compulsion with purpose, and underneath it all is a growing sense of hollowness, the feeling of wanting everything and enjoying nothing. But desire doesn't have to control us. The first step is understanding that wanting less doesn't mean living less. When we learn to regulate desire, we actually reclaim the ability to enjoy life more deeply. The goal is not to suppress desire, it's to refine it, to separate authentic wants from manufactured cravings, to distinguish between what nourishes us and what numbs us. Authentic desire grows slowly. It requires anticipation, effort, patience. When we delay gratification, dopamine builds gradually, rather than spiking dramatically. This creates a more sustainable reward pathway, one that enhances satisfaction rather than destabilizing it. We rediscover the pleasure of working towards something, the joy of earning rather than consuming, the fulfillment that comes from presence rather than impulse. This is why practices like fasting, digital breaks, minimalism, and intentional routines feel so powerful. They don't eliminate pleasure, they recalibrate it. They make space for desires that are aligned with our values rather than imposed by our environment. When we deliberately reduce excessive stimulation, we give the brain a chance to reset. Suddenly, simple things feel pleasurable again. A conversation feels meaningful. A meal tastes richer. A walk feels grounding. Life regains contrast. Wanting less doesn't make us weaker, it makes us freer. Because when we're no longer controlled by craving, we can choose with clarity. We can say yes with intention, no with confidence, and pause without panic. We can pursue desires that build us rather than break us. And we can experience pleasure not as a frantic escape, but as a steady, grounded, deeply human part of a balanced life.